Hey guys, I'm MLF Pro Keith Poche. Today I want to talk to you about summertime jerkbait fishing. First I want to tell you about my tackle. I use a 7.0 medium heavy eye rod with a 6:3:1 gear ratio. I'm using 10-pound test fluorocarbon, and I'm using a Lucky Strike jerkbait. You know, one of the main keys that I look for is any kind of point that's got wind blowing on it. That's real key to pull those fish up, and when I throw that jerkbait out there, it's real distorted. That fish can't get a real good look at it. Typically, a wind-blown point is shad pushed up on, so the fish are already there feeding on shad. And I'm gonna throw a shad color, depending on where I am in the country. It's a pretty clear lake we're on today, and I'm throwing more of a translucent color. I don't want something too bright that's going to stick out too much. I want something that's going to kind of blend in with the shad that the fish can't really get a good look at. They're going to notice it, but they're not going to notice that it's not a shad. So something that blends real well with the watercolor, and location, a wind-blown point where I feel like there's fish already up feeding, running shad, is going to be a real good key spot for me to target. So I just throw it out, up shallow as I can. I can already see the bottom, and a lot of times you can't see the fish in that wind because they're tucked in a little crack or a little shadow. So I'm just going to throw it up shallow and work it off the first drop. And a lot of times, even throughout the day, those fish will sit right on that drop, and they'll see it when it comes over that ledge. So you can always catch fish that are below you, but it's really hard to catch fish that's above you. You can fish under them. You can't fish under them, but you can fish above them. So, typically this time of the year, I'm gonna work that jerkbait a little faster because the water's warm. They're a lot more active. The shad's active. They're moving a lot. In the winter months, you're gonna work it a lot slower. Everything's real lethargic. The shad are dying, so it's a real slow fall. The shad are falling down, and the bass come up and eat them. So having that bait, really slow is going to trigger that fish. He's going to see it up there, but he's looking at it, and he's noticing all the shad falling. So he's thinking that's another dead shad. So working it real slow in the winters works, but in the summertime, you're going to speed it up. I very seldom let it sit very long. So I'm going to cast it out up shallow, work it down, maybe let it stop for a minute, just see what happens. Then I'm going to work this thing. I'm gonna pull it off that ledge and get a reaction bite. I want to move this bait. Trying to find a fish that's up feeding. We might have to run a lot of points to find a few fish. It's fish that are not deep right now. It's fish that aren't in 20 foot. They're in 10 or less. Especially in this clear water. Those fish have come out of 10 foot of water to hit this bait that's only diving 2 to 3 foot. So, but I'm gonna work this bait. I'm not going to slow it down. I may have a half a second pause, but having that bait moving, because those fish are so active, they're moving so much that I'm wanting to cover a lot of water and find those aggressive fish. Typically, I'll start on a point. I'll work my way down a bank, maybe even a shade spot where there's a tree casting a shadow. A lot of times fish are sitting in the shade for an ambush point. So I'll cast that bait in that shade, right in the shade, and I'll work it out through that shade. Now, every once in a while, I'll stop it, right when I feel like that bait's right at the edge of the shade and the sun. That fish will follow it to the edge of the shade. Well, that fish don't want to go in the sun, so he'll follow it to right at the end, and sometimes he'll grab it right before it goes into the sun. So that'll be the only time I would stop that bait. Also, docks are real good. Docks is a real good place to hold a lot of fish, and especially with the wind blowing up against the side of that dock, those fish are suspended underneath that dock. Now, depending on what depth they're suspending in, typically they're going to be 10 foot or less, depending on the type of lake you're on. But I'm gonna throw that jerkbait up as close as I can, and I'm gonna work it out. But the key, a real ideal cast on a dock is getting it right in front of it and working it down the front edge or the side edge. And if there's like a little shadow, let's cast a little shadow right there. So I'm gonna work that bait. It's getting right below those pontoons. It's a floating pier. So those fish are suspended right underneath those pontoons, or further down, but as long as I'm getting that bait right below those pontoons, that fish is able to see it, and they're up in the water column because the wind's blowing, so they're gonna see that bait, fairly good, and they're gonna come out and attack it. So I'll hit the front, hit the corners, hit the back corners, but I'll also hit this edge, this side right here. It's real key. Another thing I like to key on is the back corners of docks. I'll throw this jerk bait or other kind of baits at a 45 on the back side of this dock. Typically, there's some brush on the back side piled up along the bank. It's a little bit shallower. Fish, they're not here suspended over deep water. It's kind of like a happy medium. So they'll kind of be right off the bottom and the back, but they're in a position where they're in a feeding mode. So I'll take that jerk bait and I'll put it as close as I can to that corner right there, and I'll bring it, if I can, almost underneath that back corner, because they'll sit right there on the back side and as an ambush point and just wait for food to come by, especially if there's current. Sometimes you go to some lakes and there's current, and there's current pushing around the back side of that dock, and they'll sit right there on the edge of that pontoon and wait for food to come back around. So if I'm throwing a jig or a jerk bait, I'm gonna key on the back corners of these docks.